before we do a deep dive into the work you're doing. But what was it originally that led you to relationship work?
Actually, it was a divorce and the death of my mother,
Mm.
basically. I had been teaching yoga. So now, I've been certified as a teacher for almost 20 years. And it was early 2000, it was 2013 or 2014. Anyway, I had a really painful, it wasn't so much that the divorce was that painful. It's painful, but it's not like it was a dramatic divorce, but I had a very painful marriage, and it was a short marriage. And to the man who I thought for sure that was like it, that was going to be the man I was going to end up with. And then at the same time, when we were starting to split, my mom had been, or right before we split, and I thought things were actually good, my mom had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. So I was going through, and then, when we split, it's like she had a couple months to live. So I definitely faced like the dark night of the soul. I was like, wow, I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is what it's like when everything falls apart, like when everything falls apart. And I was beyond crushed and devastated. Like I didn't even know like how I was going to thank God I have a dog. It was pretty much the only reason why I would get up in the morning. And I remember she's still a dear friend of mine, but at the time we were neighbors. She lived in the same building as myself, and she was a coach, not a relationship coach, but a coach. And I'd been in the world of, the yoga world for, at that point, practicing and teaching like 20 years, like overall my almost 20 years. And so I was definitely in the sort of spirituality, wellness, fitness world. Like I was aware of that, but I so was not aware of the coaching world. And this is 2014. Like Instagram wasn't really like even like a thing then. So it was so not my world. But anyway, she found me, and, one day, like sitting outside, and I was like crushed, and she knew it. And we were talking, and she basically was like, you should really listen to Tony Robbins. And I was like, the infomercial dude? Like I was so not part of that world. And then she was like, you should really become a coach. And I just remember thinking, like, I can barely brush my teeth in the morning, let alone think about like what I'm going to do with my life. But funny enough, for the couple of years leading up to that moment, I had this sort of nagging feeling that I wanted to do more, but I didn't know what. Like I always loved teaching yoga, and I always regarded myself as a teacher. And I definitely identify more as being a teacher than I do as being a coach, just a teacher in general. And I never knew what it was. And it was really through the process of picking myself up and moving on from this devastation that I learned some tools, right? And I learned, I applied lots of people's tools, but I really followed Tony Robbins' tools. And I enrolled in his school. And there was a big emphasis on relationship. And I'd always been sort of obsessed with relationship. And I was obsessed with understanding like what happened, like why the hell, I just turned 40, like why the hell am I 40, like getting like don't have a child, because I always had this blueprint. I would be married by a certain age, I would have kids, I would have like my kid, like like a baby monkey hanging from my arm as I was teaching yoga. Like I had this whole blueprint, like we all do. We all have a blueprint of how we think our life is going to turn out. And pain happens when our life doesn't match our blueprint. And especially when you think that you have no control over what's going to happen to your future. So I had to figure it out, and I did. And I thought, I must teach this. I must help others. And that's how I started teaching yoga. I found yoga, and I just woke up one day and felt totally compelled to teach it to others. And I started coaching anybody on anything. I just was like more and more, and I was doing workshops at the yoga studio. I mean, I was unstoppable. And I really started to hone in on relationships because number one, that was my biggest interest. And number two, that's just where my skill set really lied. And that's, in a medium version of the story of what got me here.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, we're glad you did. Glad you entered the work.
Yeah, it's beautiful that you were able to turn your pain into, you alchemize it into something that is now lighting up the world. So we want to get into some of the things that you have workbooks and workshops on your site that we felt really called to. So One of those is about, managing your insecurities. And you wrote that managing your insecurity is one of the biggest duties we have in relationships. So can you walk us through what this process looks like when an insecurity pops up?
Yeah. So I would say that, insecurity and anxiety shows up in relationship a lot more than security. Like a lot of people like to think of, the way that they think of relationship, they think of it in terms of attachment styles. And I really think the whole attachment style theory is valid and wonderful and extremely helpful. I try to steer people away from diagnosing themselves, because once you've diagnosed yourself with having any sort of pathology, it's very hard to escape that identity, and it kind of like sits with you. So, but for the purpose of just answering this question as concisely as I can, many people the people who I've worked with have sort of like anxious attachment stuff where they get insecure in a relationship. And even if you don't, the reality is, after you reach a certain age, chances are you've had your heart broken. Chances are you've been dumped or broken up with. And, I even tell people after a certain age, if you haven't, you better go out and get dumped, because like you have to have the experience of rejection. It just builds character almost, like we have to learn about ourselves. It's part of life. But we all bring our past into our current relationship. And if we haven't dealt with our past, if we haven't dealt with our wounds and with our traumas, our insecurities are going to sabotage the relationship that we are in. And it doesn't mean we all get insecure, and healthy relationships are ones where the couple is open and willing to reassure one another, because we all need reassurance once in a while. But we can't just project all our fears onto a partner or onto the relationship all the time. So we do have a duty to manage it. And so what does managing look like? Well, on a very strong level or severe level, it means if you haven't been to therapy, if you haven't worked with a coach, if you haven't actually dealt with your triggers, it's time to start. Because some people are just a walking trigger waiting to happen. It's like they have a big slash on their arm, and even if there's a little tickle, they're triggered, and we have to be responsible for our triggers. And for other people, it's just maybe it's incorporating certain exercise or meditation, or speaking to trusted counsel or friends when we get stuck in our heads and we create a story about what's going on that is likely most of the time has nothing to do with what's going on. And then you have people you trust who kind of keep you in check. So that's sort of what I meant by that. And we all have that duty inside of a relationship.
Yeah. And I know a lot of our triggers are around our self-worth. So that's another thing that you help people with, is raising their self-worth. Can you talk about maybe one of the first steps when it comes to how to do that? How to raise our self-worth?
Yeah, that's great. So one of the most important that people don't always like to hear is you have to stop thinking about yourself so much. And what I mean by that is go do something that you're proud of. Go do something that you're proud of. And that doesn't mean something where, everything has to be based around achievement. It's more just go give to someone else, go give to a cause, I don't know, go, if you're into dogs, go walk dogs at a shelter, do things that align you with your values, because we tend to lose esteem for ourselves when our behavior and our actions are not congruent with that which we really value. So the first step would be to go do things, say things, behave, take action that really aligns with what's very important to you. And so in a way, raising your self-worth has to be also about understanding what's really important to you. And then you start to live your life according to what's really important to you, because we betray ourselves every time we do or say something that's against what's really important to us. And so it's sort of just a process of kind of understanding yourself and then doing and saying things that are, in alignment with yourself. That actually really raises self-worth. Obviously people who are suffering from severe self-worth issues, right? They say to them, they say when I look at myself in the mirror, I just see a horrible person. That's pretty severe. That person needs therapy, or to work with a coach who specializes in that and works with that, because that's all childhood stuff. you know, and sure, it could be stuff that happened, you know, maybe they were traumatized in a past relationship, but even if they were if they were in an abusive relationship, that's also childhood
Yeah.
stuff. So that's like where like you have to kind of, that person has to probably go a little bit deeper. But eventually all roads lead to what's important to you and are you living your life in alignment with what's important to you? And
Yeah.
making your decisions for yourself. Creating boundaries could be an amazing way to create self-worth. You know, if you're a people pleaser and you have no boundaries, being brave and courageous and just creating like little, like practicing creating boundaries with people and just really small microcosmic ways, like little sort of stackings of little things every day that where you have to confront your fear, that raises your self-worth. Kind of the little things, really.
Yeah, well, when we try to, what we do is get overwhelmed with trying to make such a big change all at once. Okay, I'm gonna throw my, negative self-talk out the window and I'm gonna be worthy now. But
Yeah,
let's be real, it's not gonna work.
It's just
Yeah.
not gonna work. Yeah.
It's definitely those minor everyday things that we can little by little let seep in and adjust what we have been running as a pattern for the better part of our lives. And I wonder if, we talk about, we here on the show, of course, we talk to a lot of different psychologists and therapists in all different modalities, and deeply believe that so much of the work that we all have to face in our lives is what happened in our younger years while we were maturing into what we are supposed to be adults. But of course, a lot of us didn't get there. I'm raising my hand myself with that one, of course. And then we have to do that work when we are quote unquote adult, in the later years of our life. So is it that we, there's so much of that resistance that I feel like happens when you talk about, well, what are your mother wounds? What are your father wounds? And people are like, oh, I had a great childhood. I grew, there was no problems growing up. How do you start addressing that with someone who is so resistant to doing inner child work that belongs in those caregiving years?
Well, I have an answer to both of that. As a coach, I definitely go into the past, but if I feel like someone has a tremendous amount of trauma, they need to see a therapist, not me, and not any coach, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing that I would say. It's all in the questions that you ask. It's all about your questions. So what's different about, in my experience with coaching and therapy, in therapy, there's a lot of questions too, is, it's a delicate balance. Like I'll want to know certain things about a person's past, and I've been in therapy a lot over the years, in and out over the years. So I feel, and my father's a psychiatrist, so I know therapy almost too well, but I try not to keep people in the past when I'm working with them too much, especially if someone has been in therapy a lot. I try not to keep them there because they're so trained to be always in the past. But it's all in the questions. It's like when people are, resistant, I'm not always searching for trauma in a person. What I'm searching for is their conditioning. And what I mean by that is, what did you learn? What did you learn about who you had to be in order to be rewarded and loved, right? Like, did you learn you had to, please everyone? Did you learn that like by being the funny one in the family, you got love? Did you learn that by being the pretty one, you got love? Did you learn by being, the best at sports, you got love? And what did you learn that you could never do? Oh, I could never speak up. I could never break the rules, right? The person who could never break the rules, chances are they're such a rule follower and they have so many rules for how they live. And then they have so many rules for their partner, right? And then, right? And then you have once in a while, the one who breaks all the rules because they learned that by being, the rule breaker, that's how they actually identified as being significant in their family. It's like somehow it's like the black sheep is both a badge of honor and a badge of shame, right? And so someone like the black sheep of the family will have that inner conflict of like, well, I always want to be different, and that's sort of like I'm the cool one, but at the same time I'm sort of shamed for that. And then you start to see these inner conflicts inside of people and how it affects everything. So again, I'm more interested in people's conditioning and having them understand their conditioning and all the rules and the blueprints and the things that they've come up with as a result of their conditioning and how it's impacting their relationships, how they're impacting their lives.
Yeah. And that introspective work, like just peeking into that initial like questioning of your own shit. It seems so obvious, but I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of people spend most of their life trying to run from questioning themselves. They don't want to hear questions from other people. They do not want to be intimate with themselves. And that's it. And then it looks like they don't want to be intimate with other people, but really they just don't want to be intimate with themselves.
Totally.
Yeah.
Those
And I know,
okay.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say those are the people who usually don't seek out a coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that because you mentioned the attachment styles and you said you speak to a lot of anxiously attached, quote unquote, because again, labeling might not be the healthiest way, but here on the show, we like to say any of these theories or modalities like attachment styles and such, it's about experimenting with what that label holds for you and then be done with that. When you're done with that, move on to what's next. But you said, you speak to a lot of people who are anxiously attached, which I could understand as someone coming from that same kind of mindset or patterning, that they are the people who are seeking, like, we want to fix, we want to figure out what's wrong with us and others and all the things. Is that what you see more of a attachment, if we're talking attachment styles, more of someone who has that anxious attachment?
Yeah. Or it's the person who's just like, very perfectionistic, right? Like I need to fix this. And I am constantly having to remind people, but you're not broken, But I've had to let go of a few clients who, I think it's like in theory, they really wanted to do the work, but they weren't ready. And I don't want to waste anyone's time or money, and I don't want to waste my time. So, I've certainly had to be like, you're just like, you have to be ready for coaching. And especially the kind of coaching that I offer, because it's like, I'm super compassionate, but I don't really let anyone, I was trained technically to be an interventionist. So basically if I see someone really going down the wrong path, I'm going to point it out. Like I'm going to insert my opinion often. So that's also a little bit different, but yeah.
That makes a good coach, that accountability factor though. That's why you pay to show up to someone to call you on your shit.
Totally.
And I like that you look at the conditioning. It's interesting that you don't look at the trauma, because I feel like that is a lot of what people do is like look for the trauma. And I know that you want to help people break free of like their childhood story. So is that what's there? Like, what do you feel? Do you feel like when you're looking into the trauma, they become too attached to the childhood story, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's a delicate balance. And like I said, if I feel like someone has had a tremendous amount of trauma and they haven't yet been in therapy, I'm going to send them to therapy. If they've been in therapy a bunch and they're like, why am I not moving forward? Then I'm like, because you're so stuck in the past, right? Yeah. So there's that. But if I feel like someone is really traumatized, I will refer them out, for sure. So, we all have trauma, but I believe it was Gabor Mate who said this. I'm 90% positive, so I apologize if I'm misquoting it. But, trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is how you, and I'm butchering this. Trauma is not what happened to you, but trauma is like what you see, or what your response to the trauma, and like what you thought happened to you. And, there are obviously some, really unspeakable traumas that happen, but, trauma obviously doesn't have to be quote unquote unspeakable for it to be trauma. But something that we do is something happens to us and we give it a meaning, right? And maybe the meaning is my father never loved me, or my mom never loved me, or maybe the meaning is no one can be trusted, right? And then that's the person who has tons of trust issues, which is we give it a meaning. And we don't realize that the meaning that we give stuff can either re-traumatize us over and over and over again, or it can free us. And so what I help people do is to point out how they are unconsciously controlled by a story in their childhood that's dictating how they live their lives, particularly in relationship. And then to help them sort of like change the story. I mean, and that's very much what I do, like with people with, heartbreak. I mean, I do that with people just in relationship, in addition to just, I love teaching people how to communicate. But yeah, so, it's like, it's always about changing the meaning. And when you change what something means to you, the story changes, and people don't realize, and why would they? I certainly didn't know this. I had to be taught this, but people don't realize that like the facts of your story might be true, but you have to understand the more distance you have from the event, what you're replaying in your mind has been distorted. There's so many parts of it have been distorted, deleted, added, because that's what the mind does. You can't actually recall all of it. So the story, your memory of the story of the event starts to actually build. It becomes like a thing. It becomes something that's actually not even true anymore.
Right.
And so it's really helping people to kind of look at that.
Yeah, that's really slaying your own dragon, so to speak. It's
Mm-hmm.
going in the cave and realizing that maybe it's not this big dragon I had made up this fantasy of, and it's actually something I can handle and I can hold. And
Absolutely.
yeah. Wow. That's so huge for people to understand, first of all, that we all have trauma. And then that if you can go in and look at it with a skilled, person, especially, would be very helpful, having a coach or therapist to do that, that you can get to a place where you get to rewrite the old story that's no longer serving you and that is definitely affecting you negatively in your life. And that's what we don't want. And it brings me to a question about heartbreak, because you talked about ways that we re-traumatize ourselves in life if we're not able to see how the experience we're having is happening really for us instead of to us, right? So something happens, we have a bad relationship, a bad heartbreak, and this thing that we could really just decide, oh my God, we were a victim to this and we were in this trauma all over again. And oh my God, my dad left me this way and now my boyfriend's leaving me this way and I'm just not worthy of love. Obviously, the ego story turns on and all these lies start going.
Sure.
And we're lost, right? And what are the ways that we shift that, or what are the modalities you teach that help us get through heartbreak? Because I know this is one of your specialties that people come to you for. You have a whole workbook on it. How do we survive heartbreak?
Yeah.
Well, the first step is you got to feel your feelings. You really do, because we are really just, especially in this culture, so masterful at repressing how we feel. So you really have to feel your feelings. And then paradoxically, then it's about, trying not to stay in the negative emotion all the time, but sometimes you have to initially just go through the process of grieving. So there's going to be anger, there's going to be resentment, there's going to be crying, there's going to be all of that. So you do have to kind of like let yourself feel those feelings. And then, and obviously in the beginning, if it's super fresh and it's traumatic, you just need to do the best that you can, lean on your friends, all of that, lick your wounds, like feed yourself, drink water, take long walks.
Know that it does change and get better.
It does
keep telling yourself that.
Yeah. And just and accept the fact that you're going through this, because a big, dare I say, spiritual aspect to pain is just accepting that you're in pain, that you're suffering, and not try to just get out of the suffering.
Yeah.
But then there is a time, paradoxically, where because people, we get addicted to the suffering, where it's okay, it's this breakup is still destroying you. What's going on? And then we have to look at the story. We have to look at the story, and we have to look at the blueprint. We all have a blueprint of our lives, of how we think our life is supposed to go. We have a blueprint about how our relationship is supposed to go. We have a blueprint about how our body is supposed to look like, how we're supposed to, our work. We have all these different blueprints, and we're not in control. Life is about letting go of control over and over and over again. And so you look at the blueprint and you look at the story, and the deeper work is to kind of look at your contribution to the demise of the relationship. And it's hard because in the beginning, we are going to be very caught up in vacillating between blaming the other person and then blaming ourselves. And usually when people come to me, they are in that holding pattern. They're ping-ponging between blaming them and then blaming themselves. And so that's when we have to look at the story, and when the person is ready to start to take responsibility for what went down, and really to help them see that by taking responsibility, it makes you so much more powerful. Because if we're in control, because there's nothing more that we like than to be in control. Okay, well then here's a way that you can really be in control here. You could take responsibility and know that you can change it. So sort of empowering them with that. And then, challenge, people need to be challenged all the time when it comes to a breakup, because what they will do is they will romanticize the relationship. They will just remember the good things, and they'll all of a sudden have amnesia about all the things that were just not Right. And yeah, so that's sort
so
of like
true.
the process of it. Yeah.
That's a good one. That last one there is, how do we call ourselves out on romanticizing the past,
Yeah.
romanticizing an old relationship? Because I know I can speak for all womankind right now, especially all the women I know, we do that shit.
We do that shit big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I guess we have to go to our friends and be like, hey, am I making this up or
Yeah.
something out here?
And we don't just romanticize like past relationships. I feel like I romanticize my 20s, whereas in my 20s, I just wanted to be where I'm at now, So it's like, it's just not being in the present moment. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And you're spot on. You have to go to like your most trusted friends and be like, am I seeing this clearly right now?
Yeah.
And the people who really know you will say no.
Yeah. One of my biggest wake up calls in my last relationship, we were, I think, 4 years in, and I was talking to one of my best friends about it, Natasha, and she said, your story hasn't changed since I met you. Like it's been the exact same story since the first time we talked about the relationship. And that's when it really hit me like, wow, it's really
not
has.
just
Like,
me.
what am I doing? Like, why do I keep thinking things are going to get better? It's been the same story for 4 years. So yeah, that is a really important piece.
That's a good friend too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's hard to say because it could mean the person not hanging out with you anymore because they don't want to show their weaknesses. Yeah.
Yeah.
So because we're talking about all this heartbreak, of course, I love, Jillian, that you said don't avoid heartbreak because it is what brings us character. It is what helps us grow. It shows us so much that we need as a foundation, as a human that's going to walk in this world and live a full spectrum life. So maybe this next question isn't so much about choosing the right partner or, because I know you have a unique system for choosing the right partner. Maybe there's something in there too that you can talk on about. It's not so much about choosing the right partner to avoid the conflict or to avoid the despair and the heartbreak, but choosing the right partner that you can work with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that in addition to that, we also have to be kind of real with ourselves. Like, look, couples sometimes will come to me and one is anxious, the other person's kind of avoidant, and it's a beautiful thing when they can work through it. And I certainly don't want to discourage any of your listeners who might be in a dynamic like that, where I don't want to discourage them and think like, well, now I have to break up with my partner. That's absolutely not true. I think that when we think that we go to relationships or we want to go to relationships to get love, but really we go to relationships to grow. I mean, it is the opportunity to grow, because the relationship will be a mirror, and sometimes we're not going to like what we see, and we always have to face ourselves inside of a relationship. That being said, so I just wanted to preface my next statement with that. If you're single and, for example, you have a lot of anxiety in relationship, yes, you have to deal with that. Like we started with, our biggest duty in a relationship is to manage your insecurity. It's not like you're off the hook. But you also have to be super real with yourself. If you had a parent that abandoned you or that was super avoidant, if that's just like part of your history, don't freaking date avoidance. And you don't date, you want to find someone who is like not so triggered by your anxiety, like is totally present with you, like has some sort of more securely attached, doesn't every time they're upset, shut down, because those people, they find each other. And I think it's because they're trying to work out childhood stuff. It's all the unconscious stuff, but in the spirit of becoming more conscious people inside of a relationship, which is what I'm all about. Like sometimes you just got to be like, yeah, they're hot, I'm into them, but that's not good for me. And the only way that you can know that something's not good for you is by understanding and knowing yourself. And so first and foremost, you have to know who you are and to know yourself and to be like, you know what, that's just like, and know certain things, certain character traits, certain whatever, if you're someone who likes to nest and really build a life with someone and spend a lot of time with someone, why would you then choose to be in a relationship with someone who's always on the go, traveling and all that? So I do believe that as much as choosing a partner is an emotional decision, it also should be a practical decision. And I think that as we get older, we need to be responsible for sort of that practicality. I hope that answered your question.
Where were you in my 20s, Jillian?
Actually,
I don't think I intellectually would have held it,
Yeah, because in our 20s, we're supposed to mess up, you know, like get it
I
wrong.
dated so many avoidants after my last breakup. That was my number one promise to myself. Like, I will recognize if they're an avoidant before, getting invested, and my next partner will not be an avoidant. And I think it's super helpful too, to like put it all on paper, what you want in a partner, because once you have it on paper and you're able to like look at it, it's way easier for you to notice it when,
And I think writing the list is really important. But then I think that over time, what you start to recognize is, rather than attributes, so what are my non-negotiables, right? Instead of like,
yes,
what are the things I must have, and just keep it to 2 to 3 things. And what are like the 1 or 2 things that I absolutely cannot deal with? And then how do I want to feel inside this relationship?
Yeah, that's really good.
And I want to just bring back the way you started this topic. We may be in relationships, like I just use my own relationship, for example, like we always do on this podcast. I would have identified, I know we said we're not going to talk about attachment styles and label ourselves, but here we go. I would identify as an anxiously attached entering this relationship that I have with my husband. And he would have identified as a avoidantly attached at the start, at least, of our relationship. And it caused a lot of strife and struggle. And it could have been easier had I not chosen avoidant and he had not chosen an anxiously attached person. But, we do work through it. And by the way, because those are some of our core issues that attachment style stems from, it comes back up over and over again. We've been together 8 years and it's continued to come back up. And it's, we have to decide, of course, in a relationship to continue to deal with those things. I don't know if it's the easiest route or it's the recommended route to go out and find, the opposite attachment style and then try to get to both of you to secure. But there is some hope there. So just to speak to those people that are maybe avoidance listening or with an avoidant listening.
Absolutely. And when 2 people are like willing to look at themselves and work on it, like I would say magic happens. I know some of the most beautiful relationships are 2 people who like stuck it out. We're like, oh wow, like we're aware of these stuff, worked through it. I mean, those are some of the strongest relationships.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I definitely don't want to discourage people who are in it. You can't you need both people to work on it.
Yeah.
And then, so say, we've moved on to being in a relationship. What I know this is another thing you cover pretty well, is effective tools for how to communicate in an argument. This is something I would really like to know for myself.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I like to bring it first and foremost to our bodies and our physiology. And the thing is like, one of the things that we have to start to become more aware of is that when we're in an argument, our nervous system starts to get flooded, right? Like our adrenaline starts to flood and we our blood starts to, our heart rate increases and we start to go into basically fight or flight. And so when we're in an argument, it's really important to find your breathing. And if it's starting, because, arguments are part of being in a relationship. And I think that like the healthiest relationships are ones where a couple can argue and then they kind of just drop it. It's not constantly brought up over and over again. But in those moments, what you have to do is first and foremost is like, if you think that it's getting out of control, is to sort of have a safe word or just have a moment and just be like, okay, we are entering that territory where we're going to say something that we're going to regret. So let's take a timeout. I really am a big believer in timeouts.
Yes.
And then, the thing is debate has no place in a relationship. It works in other platforms, but you can't debate your partner, because when there's a debate, there's a winner. And wherever there's a winner, there's a loser. And a really amazing psychologist, therapist by the name of Terry Real talks about this. So when there's a winner, there's a loser. And then you don't want to be living with someone who feels like a loser, because then you're like, your partner feels defeated and they feel defeated by you. That is not going to increase closeness. No. So it's just not. So you have to take a time out and breathe. And another thing that people do is that they take things so personally. We have to remember that if we get defensive or shut down or like start yelling, we are in our wound. We are in a childhood patterning, like we have been triggered. So that's when things have to slow down and we have to really watch the stories that we create. And I think that a couple needs to be like, okay, let's slow down. Let's take turns. Who's going to be the speaker? Who's going to be the listener? And the listener has to really listen, which is hard, because usually when we listen, we're listening because we want to reply and we want to defend ourselves. So you have to just pause. And then the person who's speaking just has to say, you know, this is what I saw happen. And this is my interpretation. Like, this is what I made up about what happened.
Yeah.
And it made me feel, and this is where people always mess up, because they say, you know, it makes me feel like you don't care. No, that's not a feeling. Like, talk to a feeling. It made me feel scared. It made me feel angry, but I realized that I was just really scared. It made me feel anxious that you were going to leave me. And that's the vulnerability part. We are all terrified that we're not going to be enough for each other. And so we have to really talk. We have to say, this is how I interpreted it. And it made me feel really, really sad and anxious, or, you know, upset. It made me feel betrayed. And then the person listening has to just first acknowledge how they made the other person feel. And I say, that was never my intention. Can I tell you, are you willing to listen about like what I really meant? Like what my intention was there. This is not easy stuff, but I do think that this is how we elevate our relationships, as we start to have conversations where we're like, okay, let's identify. Maybe you need a couples coach or therapist to help you identify. Let's identify the pattern. Because people are rarely fighting about the thing. They're fighting about the thing that happened 10 years ago. Like, you know, let's identify the dance that we get into, and let's interrupt the pattern with a timeout. And then let's come back to this as two people who love one another, not two people who are looking to defeat one another.
That's big.
Yeah. And then for a moment, you got to just say to yourself, like, I'm so afraid of losing this person that I am creating a story that convinces me that they meant to hurt me. That was their intention, was to hurt me. And if you're in a relationship with someone that you genuinely believes wants to hurt you, well, then you better get out of that relationship.
It's a problem. Yeah.
You just better get out. But if you can say, when you've calmed down, they hurt me, and I'm really, really, I feel really hurt by them, but I know that was not their intent. I know that they never really wanted to harm me.
Wow.
Then we're talking. Then we can actually repair.
Yeah. Taking that breather, that mindfulness gap, that slowing down is so critical. And then being able to assess it from that calmer place of like, okay, what's actually happening here? I know this person, we both have love for each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, just yesterday or an hour ago, we were really loving on each other. And now we're in this other situation that my ego story is coming up and saying, oh, well, they're going to abandon me. You know, all the fears come up. If we can identify and communicate that without the blaming words, without the, you did this, you made me feel, and instead I'm telling myself a story that this happened, whatever, or even prefacing it like you're saying, like, in that situation, I felt this way, that way. And instead of being that blame game where he becomes the loser and I'm the winner, or I'm, better than, or I'm the one who is the victim and you're the one hurting me, the antagonist. You don't want to sleep with the loser. You don't want to be closer to the loser. So don't make each other a loser. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it's so true that most of the time we're fearing that we're going to lose the person. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting that even out of that fear, we end up like putting our foot out the door and like jumping ship, or like threatening to jump ship, even though like it's from the fear that we're losing them. You know what I mean? Yet we're going to.
Totally. So it's like, as long if I leave first, then I don't have to face the pain of being left. We all fear abandonment. Mm-hmm. I believe that. I believe that everyone fears abandonment. I think it's part of being a human being. Mm-hmm. So I think that and I think there's definitely people fear it more than other people, for sure. But I even think the most, secure people actually also fear abandonment. I mean, nowhere else do we face our biggest fears than inside of a relationship. It's where we are most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And people, people have all sorts of funny patterns. I mean, some people some couples get into these huge dramatic fights, but then they have amazing sex afterwards. And somehow it works for them,
And so, that becomes a pattern, though. It could be toxic too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, there's everything out there.
We just got to keep looking at our shit and evolving from there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And calling ourselves out instead of calling our partner out over and over, and it becoming. So I do want to ask you, if we have a few more minutes here, about the way to end the anxiety and sadness cycle that we get stuck in so often.
Yeah, so it's crazy making, it's like whenever we are sort of ping ponging or vacillating between two emotions that are disempowering and we feel kind of stuck in that pattern. Usually there's a few ways to look at it. So usually when we're stuck in that pattern, like anxiety and sadness, so everyone has an emotional home, a place that they go to emotionally most commonly. So if someone is coming to me and they're like feeling really sad, and they don't know why they're always feeling sad or really anxious, out of those two, I say, well, which is the emotion that you go to first,
Okay.
right? And maybe they say sadness, or maybe they say anxiety. Like we're every emotion that we feel, good and bad, or empowering, disempowering, has a whole architecture to it. So we're doing something with our body, we're doing something with our breath, we're doing something with our thoughts. There are thoughts that yield anxiety and there are thoughts that yield sadness or anger or any emotion or happiness, and we're focusing on something. Typically in anxiety, we're focusing too much on the future, and sadness, we're focusing too much on the past. And what people usually do to get themselves out of the pattern is that they numb themselves. Some people numb themselves with drugs and alcohol, some people numb themselves with food, some people numb themselves with social media, with television, shopping, whatever it is. And really the to get to the root of it is to understand what the inner struggle is. Because whenever you feel stuck in life, like emotionally stuck, there's an inner conflict. And you got to get to the root of that inner conflict. And maybe it's, the conflict is, over there is what I really want to do, but over there is what I think I should be doing, right? So that's a very classic thing of an inner conflict. Inner conflicts also are, again, like I feel it's always like what I should be doing versus what I really deep in my heart want to do. Or an inner conflict is, like in relation, I'll bring this within the context of relationship. Like if I do this one thing, I'm going to make my girlfriend really happy, but I'm going to make my mom really unhappy. Right? Or if I do this thing, I'm going to be really unhappy, but at least I'll make my happy, So there's always, like in my work, like I'm digging to find the inner conflict. And then the other aspect of being caught in a pattern like that is that everything that we do that we would consider as like not serving us or quote unquote negative, we're getting some sort of side benefit for it. There's something that we're getting, whether it's the benefit of familiarity, whether you've been doing that pattern of cycling back and forth between anxiety and depression for so long that to not do it is so unfamiliar, So there's the benefit of like the certainty, the familiarity. Some people, when they're sad, like that's how they get their attention. They don't even realize it. It's totally unconscious. Or when they're anxious, that's when they, the anxiety is like is how they respond. They're so sick of being sad. At least when they're anxious, they get some work done, or like at least when they're angry, they go into action. So it's really helping people understand why they're in that pattern to begin with, to look at the inner conflicts, to look at how it makes them, how it comforts them in a really weird paradoxical way, and then giving them tools to kind of break themselves out of it.
Gosh, that makes so much sense, because I see it as like I can totally see where the sadness, the pity part, that validation that you get from the external, from friends, family, whatever.
Yeah.
You might be sick, you might be sad, you might be anxious about something. And then that layered in. So that's like the surface level. Okay, that's what's happening right now. Okay, I can understand where I'm receiving that positive validation, and I'm addicted to that in some way. But then you come from maybe a chaotic home where it was always up and down, and you had all these reasons to be anxious or sad or depressed or whatever. And that feels like home to you.
Absolutely.
Feels even safe in a way, which is so crazy to say it that way, because you look at it, you're like, that's not safe, but that's what your nervous system considered home. So in a way it identifies as safe, right? And we just layer it on and use that pattern for the rest of our lives without looking at it. We can't figure the why the hell we're sad all the time or anxious all the time. And you break that stuff down for people. That's magic, straight up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's for people who just like, again, it's like freedom from your past, and freedom from your conditioning.
Yeah.
Sorry, my dog is.
He has an anxious pattern down there. The
Anxiety.
mailman. That's awesome stuff. Juicy stuff. All right. So I think we're ready to wrap up here. We have just a few short questions to ask you. We ask everyone who comes on the show. So first off, if you could hug your younger self right now, Jillian, what would you say?
If I could hug myself right now,
Your younger self. Yeah.
my
you
younger
could hug.
self right now, what would I say to her? Oh, that's such a good question. I would just tell her that everything's going to be okay and just to relax. Just tell her I would just hold her, and just tell her that she's safe.
Yes.
Really good. If you could have the whole world read one book, which would it be?
Oh, wow. That's so good. Can it be 2 books?
Sure.
We always cheat with this one.
Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl
Okay.
and Letting Go by David Hawkins.
That's a new one. Letting go.
Yeah, so it's a book that teaches you how to really feel your emotions in the moment and then let it go right then and there. And it's really, really simple, but it's constantly like he's died, but his whole mission was to help people stop repressing and how to feel the emotion like viscerally, and then to breathe and let it go over and over and over again.
That I need in my life. Love that.
So it would be, there's so many more books, of course, but those would be the 2
Yeah.
that I would have everyone read. Yeah.
Thank you for those. So if you could whisper one phrase to everyone on the planet, what would that be?
Oh God, these are so good. Breathe and let go.
Yeah. Even right now, we could just relax a little bit. We could just breathe a
Breathe
little
and
bit.
let go.
That is really good.
Breathe and let go.
Just breathe. It's such a big one. It sounds so like everyone breathes, but it's to consciously breathe.
Because I think that our biggest obstacle that we face today is stress.
Yeah.
And managing our stress. We are just way too stressed out.
It's like we're applauded for that. We're glorified for busyness and for stressing on stuff, like getting shit done. That's stressful. There's no relaxation happening there.
Yeah, we have way too much stress. Way too much stress.
Yeah.
Breathe.
Do mode. Before we let you go, where can people find you online?
So certainly my Instagram account, which is at Jillian Turecki, and my website, which is jillianturecki.com. And for those who are going through a breakup, like I poured my heart out and worked like 2 years on this workbook that's just sort of been sitting there. And I'm like, I am just going to offer this for like next to nothing. And it's for people who, not everyone can afford to, work with a therapist or to work with a coach, and they don't really have this information at their fingertips. So this workbook is really amazing. All that you can find on my site. And I decided to do a membership for women. I'm going to do something that includes men as well, because men have been requesting it, but it's called The Conscious Woman. Mm-hmm. And basically in it is just like every workshop, everything I've ever done inside the membership. And plus I go live with members every month to kind of answer their questions and to kind of add new content. And we have a really, really active Facebook group where, I'm constantly asking, kind of going there. People go there for advice and little things. So that's what's going on.
Awesome.
Beautiful, beautiful.
We love that.
Yes, I want to join in there. Thank you so much for coming on the show, of course, but just for being such a light. Like I said, Jade and I both follow your Instagram account, and we find so many juicy nuggets we pass between each other there and to our friends. I have a friend going through a breakup right now who I just recommended your workbook to, and to go, just check you out, whether it's on other podcasts or ours or wherever, because you are definitely shedding light on things that most people just kind of like they'll figure out on their own. But that's just bullshit. Yeah, that's bullshit. You need help. You need people that are going to hold you accountable, and a coach like Jillian is just that person. So thank you for being a light in the world and shedding that brilliance, sharing it with all of us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, that was a lot of information in 1 hour. I'm glad we got to fit that much in.
I know. I feel
we
like
covered almost all of the things I told you guys we would try to hit.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, there's always going to be more questions that pop up.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
never get done questioning.
And now we have our magic tricks.
We do.
What do you have?
Oh, you want me to kick this off? Okay, let me just. So my magic trick today comes from someone who actually inspired a lot of our course with men that we're doing Awakening the King Within. Her name is London Angel Winters, which, by the way, as I was typing up my magic trick, I realized her initials are LAW. Law, because she's throwing down the rules in this arena of connecting in love life and all that good stuff. So the magic though I have today is about changing the way you call in what you want. And so I'm just going to kind of course, summarize what she gave me, or the magic that London Angel Winters gave me. But this is about changing the way you call in what you want. And that means changing your vibrational stand from complaining about lack, which is what a lot of us do. I know I can speak for myself here, especially from complaining about lack to instead salivating with desire for what you want. So like, just think of the differences of what those vibrational characteristics would hold, right? So that vibrational stand you might be in when you're complaining about lack, what does that look like? Nagging, oh, I want this, that, and the other, to salivating with desire for what you want. Like that's so much more yummy. So the scarcity mindset, or lack focused, whiny, weak, that whole vibe, that's not exactly what we want to be penetrating the world with, or we wouldn't be able to penetrate the world with that shit. But if you can swap that over for that more abundance focused and embodied daydreaming about being in that vision that you really want, and feeling all the way into it, that is some powerful stuff, right? That is where the juiciness lives. So the idea, of course, is that we attract what we are energetically. So the practice here is to sit in silence, bring to mind something you really want. So you can kind of do this as I'm talking as a quick version, but I would love if people listening would sit with this a little longer so they can get all the way into the juice of it. But sit in silence, bring to mind what you want, something you really desire. And envision yourself having it in a way you deeply desire, like in all the ways. It includes all the nuances. And you're going to want to spend some time here with what you desire, of course, because that feels really good. Fantasizing about all the details so that they feel really real, not thinking about what you don't have in it, not thinking about, letting all those thoughts creep in about like, well, but I don't have it. Oh, but, all the negative, and just allowing it to be a fantasy, like being really in it, picturing all the stuff that would include, looking at all the crevices of what your desire really holds for you there. And when you can get into that deep place, that fantastical place, notice how your body feels here in that deep fantasy and how it feels almost full now, right? You're full of this fantasy where it had previously, just before we started this little practice, felt empty in regards to the thing you want because you're coming from that scarcity mindset. So notice how your thoughts have even changed when you're deep in that fantasy, from thoughts of a needy, grasping nature to instead a more satisfied, full, less anxious, like almost relaxed and open tone, where you're ready to actually receive the pleasure of the thing you want. And this is really the practice here. This is what energetic alignment feels like. So take notice, because it is a super powerful thing. You've learned about this type of thing on, the Secret. And there's so many teachers we've had on this show that talk about how to get into energetic alignment and bring in what you want that way. And it's funny because it is a universal law, as people who work in this type of realm, this type of magic call it. It's a universal law, and it's coming from London Angel Winters, the law. So if you get yourself here into this fantasy and get into the juiciness of it and practice it, right? Make it a practice so that you're constantly getting back into that energetic state as often as possible, where you really feel that you're already in it. It will call in what you want, right? Because we call in, we attract what we are energetically. So if you're constantly in the energy, you call it in. So be careful. Be careful what you wish for here, because you will get it if you do this practice.
Yeah,
that's my magic. What are you doing today? You got something to say on that?
Well, I changed my magic trick during this interview because we talked about the breakup, and I thought of something that really helps me in the past with breakups. And I think I got it from like a book similar to the title of a woman's guide to breakups or something like that. I know there's an ice cream carton on the cover, but it was a really good book and I read it in my early 20s. So something that really, really helped me was after a breakup, and this could be fun for some people, may not be fun for others, but after a breakup, in order to like stop, to help your brain to not like, so like your brain, you have these like things where you go home, you lay in this bed that this person used to be in, you get up and you do something in the morning that you used to do with that person. So if you can like alter those a little bit, your brain doesn't go straight to thinking they're supposed to be there. So basically what you can do is you can move your bed to a different place in the room and change your sheets. Or you can get a little slightly different decor, switch out the pillows on your couch, or you can change up your morning routine to where it's not, I used to do this with that person because it's new, And so you go into this new looking room and your brain doesn't automatically like remember them being in there, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And again, these can be things that are simple, like changing a shower curtain. It's just important that you change the scenery and change up your schedule a little bit, because then it's like, you're not automatically thinking, that person belongs there, because it's not the same place anymore. It's not the same routine anymore. So that's really been effective for me in the past. And yeah, I invite you guys to try it as well. All right, Magic Mobbers. Thank you so much.
I want to just interrupt you real quick, because I think I found the book. It's called A Breakup Because It's Broken. The
Yes,
Smart Breakup Buddy.
Yes,
that is ice cream container on the front.
The Smart Girls Breakup Buddy. That's what it was.
Yeah, it's called A Breakup.
I was way off. That book is really, really good though, and it has a lot of challenges. Like they have like some sort of like 30-day calendar where like you don't contact them for 30 days, and you literally see the like emotions that you go throughout the 30 days on the calendar. It's really helpful. And then they have like little things like your new partner's not, if you're like just sulking at home, like that's not where you're going to find your new partner, like go out to the gym, go do something that makes you feel good.
Tips,
and yeah. And oftentimes too, that like this one, I don't know if it'll resonate, but like oftentimes after a breakup, we like don't want to even do anything with ourselves. We're not even eating, like we're just feeling so miserable. And it's like, okay, well, how about you dress as if you're going to run into him, and then it gives you motivation to actually feel better. And
that makes sense.
That for some reason for me, the changing the scenery and changing the routine was really helpful.
No, I could totally see
even if it was doing a hike in the morning instead of in the evening, just something like
shake it up. Yeah.
It really altered.
So I totally get what you're saying though, where you don't sink. Yeah. You don't sink into those places that normally there's a gap there because he would normally be there with you doing something or whatever the thing is, or you'd normally call him at this time of day. Just
different bed sheets. You'd be surprised how different.
That's a great magic trick. And I do want to say that it's brought to mind the fact that we're doing this Awakening the King Within workshop right now. And there is going to be a lot of men graduating from our course that are probably going to be
maybe we'll start a dating app.
Yeah, we need to definitely think about whatever that means. Like, how do we give these guys the credential? Like, hey, you graduated Awakening the King Within workshop, so at least women that are coming into your sphere will know that you got some new skills on your plate. I like that. And by the way, guys, this I didn't mean to turn it into a sales pitch, but I'm gonna, when it presents itself, why not? But if you have not joined our course, I think this podcast episode is releasing like the last day you're able to join Awakening the King Within. And I know we're already like as of recording this podcast, we're already more than halfway filled up. So you better get on it. If you're interested, make sure you can grab a spot, go over to awakeningkings.com to register for the course and get on.
Our first call is tomorrow, guys, and you really don't want to miss it. And we've got an extra little bonus coming up this weekend with a celebrity guest, and we'll talk about how he awakened the king within him, and you won't want to miss that either. So go sign up, awakeningkings.com. Okay. And thank you so much for listening to this episode today. If this helps you, please share it with your friends and family. It would mean so much to us, you guys. And don't forget to join us on our Instagram page at The Magic Hour and let us know what your favorite episodes have been so far. We appreciate all of your feedback and want to know what is lighting you up.
Or go listen to some of our past episodes in our podcast library. We'll meet you there. Until then, be a light.